Good evening and welcome to episode 78. Episode 78 of the Political Mic podcast. This is going to be a special episode. For one, we get to catch up with some of the first-time voters that we talked to back in 2020. And we also get to talk to a newly naturalized citizen who's going to be a first-time voter. So I'm so excited about the conversation that's about to take place. Let me go ahead and introduce some of the folks at this moment. We have Mr. Samuel McCleary, who was born in England, lived in Canada, and has resided in the United States for over 25 years. He has a bachelor's degree in English and a master's in pastoral studies. He was a teacher who has taught at the elementary, high school, and college levels. He recently became a United States citizen and is looking forward to voting in the United States for the first time in the upcoming midterm elections. Mr. Sam, thanks for being a part of this. We also have Mackenzie Boyd, back from 2 years ago, a 21-year-old senior at Wichita State, majoring in health administration with a minor in psychology. She serves as a public health chair on her campus's community service board. She occupies a mentoring position through the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and she works full-time in administration at a memory care unit in Wichita, Kansas. Upon completion of undergrad, she plans to pursue a master's in public health and allow herself access to the necessary tools needed to better serve her community and anyone in need. Mackenzie, thanks for being a part of this again. We also are going to be joined with Joseph Taylor, my brother, who is a graduating senior from the University of Alabama, Huntsville, and Oakland University with a degree in biomedical engineering and bachelor's of science in physics. He currently works at NASA as a theoretical astroparticle physics intern and is working on obtaining his chemical license while studying for the MCAT. He has received early acceptance to Albert Einstein College of Medicine for an MD/PhD program to pursue a medical degree and a PhD in neuropsychopharmacology. And we're also going to be joined with Jordan Thompson, another former 2020 first-time voter. He's actually working at a different time zone, but he's going to be coming on soon. He's also he's pursuing a Juris Doctorate at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. So I'm going to go ahead and start off the conversation. I'm so excited to have each of you here. We're going to have a wonderful time today. So I want to start the conversation by asking you, and anyone can feel free to just jump in. What issues are going to most influence how you will vote this November? Historically, youth voter turnout has been low. And even when you look at minorities and the turnout among minorities in off-year elections, that's also low. So I want to ask you, as first-time voters, what issues are going to motivate how you vote this November?
Well, for me specifically, one policy that I really was looking forward to was the student loan forgiveness. I think that is something that has attracted a lot of people's attention, and education is not equal in terms of the price that it costs, and in order to become something, it costs you something as well. So by getting rid of that starter fee, it allows more people to have more opportunities and to better their own lives. And a civilization where there's more educated citizens is just a better place to be in, and rather than us having to fight this debt for the rest of our lives. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback off of Joey, I think a very big one, aside from healthcare, is definitely inflation in general, along with, of course, all the student loan debt and just how crazy expensive things are getting and the cost of living. And when you, just like he mentioned, are already having to give to get, and then when you do get, it's like, where's my giving supposed to come from? I don't have enough in order to give out after I've, worked so hard, and then I've been put into a place, and now things are so crazy and not what they used to be. Everything is so expensive, and I can't really survive off of that or in that. So I think inflation and definitely healthcare are probably two of the most biggest focal points that I'm interested in right now.
Just to piggyback off what both of you said, definitely, you've got so many things that are going on right now with the student debt, with abortion, with inflation. There are just so many different issues that we've got to deal with. And for me, it is just being able to have us dialogue, be able to talk about these things, and be able to listen. And that's why I'm so proud that, Michael, you're putting together something like this, whereby we have a chance to be able to talk and not talk over each other, but to try and dialogue with each other. So, I mean, there's so many different issues, but for me, it is being able to at least have a platform whereby we can listen and talk and have a dialogue, not a monologue, but a dialogue. And you're going, pushing us towards that with this platform. So I'm really proud of you for offering this platform for people to be able to come and dialogue with each other. So just so many different issues. So not one that I'm particularly focused on. It's just being able to give us an opportunity to be able to talk with each other.
Well, thank you, Mr. Zep. And, in conjunction with what each of you have mentioned, as to, the issues that are most important to you. Joseph mentioned inflation. Joseph mentioned the student loan debt crisis. Mackenzie, you mentioned inflation. Mr. Sam, you even mentioned abortion rights. What was interesting was that this year, when you started to look at around May, early June, a new Politico Morning Consult poll revealed that Republicans no longer hold an advantage in voter enthusiasm over Democrats heading into the 2020 midterm elections. And the latest data showed a surge in interest among Democratic and independent voters. It's that this is in stark contrast, of course, to the anemic voter turnout that we saw among young people going back to the Obama years. And it looks like this is going to be an election where a lot of people are paying attention. A lot of young people in particular are paying attention. But I want to get your view, Mr. Sim, from the perspective of someone who is a new citizen. A new citizen, but you've been aware of the political issues since you've been in this country for a while. What do you see as certain big ticket agenda items that are causing not just young people, but you're talking about African Americans, Hispanics, newly immigrants? What is it in your view that's causing them to pay more attention to this election than in previous cycles?
Well, Mike, I say the biggest thing would be probably the abortion issue and the fact that we're now having to deal with that. I think that has created a lot of interest. But for me, my perspective is coming from 3 different countries, 3 different political systems, 3 different types of cultures and societies. I think what jumps out at me a lot when I'm talking with people and when political issues are being brought up is how much in the United States people are, and it's not everybody, so I'm generalizing, but a lot of times it seems like people are really centered on what's in it for me. What am I gaining out of this? To be specific, in Canada, for instance, it's not unusual for Canadians to say, okay, I'll sacrifice a little bit in my taxes, I'll pay a little bit more out so that the general good, so more people can benefit. Here in America, that seems to be to buck against the trend. A lot of people will say, don't reach into my pocket unless it's benefiting me. So for me, that's one of the biggest things that I see in terms of being here within the United States is this whole almost like a what's in it for me. And if nothing's in it for me, then don't reach into my pocket. I don't want to pay the taxes for that. And it's almost like taxes and those kind of things, even the word socialism has become evil. And in other countries, that's not a bad thing, to be able to sacrifice a little bit of your own in order to get the greater benefit for everyone around you. So that's one of the things that I think is the biggest thing that jumps out at me when dealing with politics and being here in the United States.
So Jordan, welcome. I introduced you already, but we are talking about what is it that is motivating you the most, or influencing you the most, rather, and how you vote this November.
Yeah, I feel like for me, I always kind of look at it through the lens of like being a part of the Black community. So I feel like that's kind of my priority is like any issue, and almost in every aspect of the world, politics is going to affect the Black community, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's like the criminal system. So that's kind of always my lens is like, or that's my motivation is like, what's going to be best for my community.
So what's interesting is that in 2018, the last, I guess, off-year election cycle that we had, where the president of the United States was not on the ballot, we saw a huge gap by age. We saw among those age 65 and older, voter turnout was 65% for women and 68% for men. In contrast, 38% for women 18 to 29 years old, and 33% for men of the same age group. I want to ask you guys what you think about that, because specifically I want to ask, why don't young people vote at higher rates? And what factors do you think are unique to young people's experiences that make them less likely to participate in elections?
Me personally, a couple of weeks ago, I actually received a letter in the mail from the Democratic Party in regards to election season coming up. And they had a little graph on it, like a little graph that, of course, caught my attention because it was the only thing that wasn't words. And when I looked at it, the graph was entitled you compared to other people your age in terms of voting. And it had me all the way up here and the other percent maybe a little more than halfway below that. And it was so interesting to me because I do feel as though that my generation, especially those who register to vote and who can vote, take a lot of interest in it. They genuinely do. However, when the lens is not essentially always placed on you, and when it is placed on you, it's always in this, why aren't you guys voting, or what do you guys have to say about this, or what's in it for you? I mean, like, why are you also selfish? Why are you only focused on what you want and not necessarily what's best for the greater good? And a lot of times I feel like that turns a good majority of them off. Not only that, but also the issues at hand. When you're looking at these issues and we're like, what are we talking about? What are we fighting for? What's really going on? Like, truly, what's happening here? And you can't make sense of it. It also turns people off. It also turns people away and not really even wanting to get involved. A lot of times I think people make it so much more complex than it truly is.
So in your view, anyone can answer again, which party has done more to appeal to not just young people, but to minorities, to immigrants too?
As of late, none of them. Just my honest opinion.
I feel like the Democratic Party definitely like historically, caters to those communities, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of it is lip service until like, election time comes around and then you hear like, oh, Joe Biden's gonna pardon everybody who got arrested for marijuana. Or, he's gonna forgive, $10,000 of student debt. And it just seems like it's almost like they do like barely just enough to get the vote, or like or like they'll dangle something in front of you and use that as it almost seems like they genuinely don't care. They're just gonna do whatever it takes to get the vote. And I know like that's kind of like a politician's job, but like if you were fighting for things from once you got into office until now, I would be more incentivized. Like, okay, like for the past 2 years, I feel like you've really been, fulfilling your promise. But it's like, okay, midterms come around, and it's like, all right, let's scramble and see like what can we do to try to get people to come out. And it's just like, y'all really don't care about us. Y'all are just using us as tools to get what you want.
I mean, in defense, we had the DNC chair, Jamie Harrison, on the last episode, episode 77, and he said, look at the legislative record for the past 2 years. Before we got to 2022, he said we passed the American Rescue Package, right? And in that package, we had a lot of incentives and goodies for folks who were struggling to make ends meet, folks who were out of a job during the pandemic season, and then we had the bipartisan infrastructure deal. We were able to get a lot of things done with our hands tied, basically, because you had Joe Manchin, you had Sinema sabotaging the party for the majority of the term, this term in Congress. But then we were able at the last leg to get across the finish line the gun bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, which has huge sums of federal funding for not just the environment, but also you're talking about lowering the cost of 10 specific prescription drug prices. Then the pardon, right? The like you mentioned, Jordan, the federal offenses as it pertains to marijuana use. That's been one of the things that the Biden administration has done. Then also the student loan forgiveness that Joey mentioned earlier at the program. Even before we got to this stage where the administration decided to forgive $10,000 for those who don't have a Pell Grant and $20,000 for those who do. He did extend it for about 3 times, and I think this is the last time he could extend it. With all of the legislative success in mind, do you still feel that the Democratic Party has just done the bare minimum, keeping in mind the political limitations that they've had placed on them in the United States Senate?
Yeah, for me, I feel like it's not necessarily that they did the bare minimum. I was kind of frustrated, last year and earlier this year about like the whole Joe Manchin situation, because I feel like if you're the Democratic Party and you can't get your party in line to reach your goals, then it's almost just like like I just feel like if you were a senator for decades and you have this like big legislation that you're struggling to get passed, it's a little frustrating and things like that. But overall, I voted for Joe Biden, and I don't feel like it's a necessarily like a bad decision. Like looking back on it, I would have done it again in comparison to his opponent. But I wouldn't necessarily say like I'm the happiest voter, or like like this is kind of what I looked for it, and in my vote. And I'll also say like I remember during like when he won, he specifically told the Black community like I think it's a direct quote that he said like I owe you guys, or like pretty much that we were a big reason why he won. So looking something specific for the Black community, I just feel like that's kind of lacking in specifics. But overall, I feel like a lot of people give him a lot of flack, and I'm not going to be that hard on him. But overall, not like not like the big fan of him or whatever.
I'll say that from my point of view, the way that I have seen these politics play out in the last, specifically like I'd say post-Obama era, it has become a lot more polarized. It's no longer Democrats and Republicans. Now we have sub parties inside of the major parties as well. So even within like these parties, we have fighting amongst ourselves as well too. So it becomes a great compromise where it's like no one is really happy, but they know that in another world they could have been way less happy. You understand what I'm saying? So it's like we're really choosing. I don't want to say the worst, like the least of two evils, but it's not really that bad of a situation. But we know how bad things can be, and we're just trying to prevent that from occurring again. But specifically, when it comes down to young voters, um, I could, to me, the one that thing that impacts me the most is the student loan debt because I'm a college student, and while Trump was president, um, the only thing I could really think of was the coronavirus checks, and that was going to come to us regardless if it was a Democratic or a Republican type party in place. So it's not to say as this was like a pro-Republican choice, but it's a choice that would have happened regardless due to the economy at the time. So if I were to say, I would say it's the Democratic Party. But this is really like a business deal, you know. It's all about negotiation and compromises, and it's always about some giving up and some taking, and it's everyone getting a turn. And unfortunately, sometimes it's not our turn, and that's what we've just experienced. And now it's more of our turn right now, but it's never full 100 to 0. It's always some type of fraction that we're. It's like a seesaw, like a balance type thing.
Zero-sum game, it sounds like
Yeah.
you're saying. And to that point, 8 days ago, NPR revealed that Biden's approval rating is up to 44%. 44% is kind of Clinton territory, Obama territory. At this stage, during the second year of their presidency, when you're on an off year, a few weeks away from an off year election, Biden is faring much similar to his predecessors in that respect. And this marks a third straight month of improvement because remember, he bottomed out in July at about 36%. Democrats are also largely keeping pace with Republicans on enthusiasm. We talked about that earlier, especially among younger voters, about the elections this fall. A continued trend over the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision. Of course, that's the June 24th, 2022 decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. That galvanized a lot of people to take this election more seriously and to pay more attention. But Biden's approval ratings aside, Democrats are below where they historically have needed to be on the question of who people say they would vote for. But at the same time, 7 in 10 respondents say they think the country is headed in the wrong direction, and inflation continues to rank as the top issue voters say they will be thinking about when they cast a ballot. I want to ask you, if you were to give a grade to the Democratic Party, which has held the majority in Congress these past 2 years, what grade would you give them and why?
Mike, I wanted to jump in here for a second. I wanted to go last since I'm like the senior citizen of the group. So I wanted to hear what everybody on all of the young people, especially since that's what the question was about. And for me, I'll never forget something that my daughter said. The question was raised, why are young people disinterested in church? And her answer was, it's not that young people aren't interested in church, it's that they don't want to see people just talk and not do. And I think that applies a lot to the younger generation. Of course, if it's wrong, then please correct me. But it seems like, in politics, in life, in different areas, younger generations are more about, let's shut up and do something. Let me see you work. Let me see, put your money where your mouth is. And if they don't see those results, the talk means absolutely nothing. And so if they don't see the results of those things, if you're promising whatever it may be and you're not following through, then it's like, okay, you know what? You're just lying to me. And we can see through that, and we're not going to buy into that game. So that's why I see a disinterest, or what I believe is the disinterest with the young people. So I just wanted to add that in.
Just to piggyback off of what Mr. McCleary was saying, even the verb itself, politics, like if someone is a very political person, what comes to my mind is someone that knows how to talk their way around situations, not someone that knows how to take charge and knows how to lead. Although politics is both of those things in tandem, to me personally, in my personal life, when someone uses that word to describe someone, immediately I know they know how to maneuver around a situation rather than directly attack it. They know how to get approval ratings rather than actually do what they intend. And if they do what they intend, it's because they have to, because they actually were put in that position because of what they said, not because they generally want to make that change. And politics really is politics. It's all about gaining and amassing as much power as possible without having to compromise as much, because the more compromisation, the less you can actually do. So imagine if you win, you make these promises, and now you have to compromise so much because now you have a split, and you seem dishonest and disingenuous now, and we generally meant well because you literally cannot move without the approval of the other party, who has their best interests at heart, which is not your party. So it's like a lockstep type move where it's like the greatest outcome is in order to have the majority as a whole and to have zero compromise at all. But that alienates a whole portion of the country, and now you have like this this civil war that's been going on in the U.S. ever since after Obama has left. We've literally been in a civil war ever since Trump has been elected, and it still hasn't gone away. And to be honest, this is probably like the most polarizing time period of U.S. history since I've been alive, since I've been aware.
And before you were alive, because even going back to Clinton, I think the Clinton administration really saw the first beginnings of this. This is when you started having Rush Limbaugh get his popularity. Other radio hosts really galvanized and capitalized, on the anger of a lot of folks in Middle America, a lot of the folks in rural America, about the changes that were going on. The 1990s and 1980s saw a burst of immigration from the Caribbean, from Latin American countries, and people didn't like it. When I say people, folks who were in the middle of the country, folks who, voted for Reagan, voted for Bush. They liked the inward focus of the country in terms of building up our military defense, making sure that we go ahead and pursue certain federal budget cuts, right, to allocate those funds elsewhere, mostly the military. But they didn't like that. And I think the 1990s really saw the beginning of that. Mackenzie, you're going to jump in?
Yeah, I would like to. I think it would, I know we're trying to move on, but I think it would honestly be remiss if I did not bring up the fact that we do, like Jordan said, I don't want to be a person who is, I agree in the terms that I feel like Joe Biden gets a lot of flack in terms of not even just him, political parties, the whole nine, right? I don't want to be that person. I am going to hold you to a standard, but at the end of the day, we also have to keep in mind that we are the people who put these people in office. And I like to think, I was watching a documentary yesterday evening, and one of the ladies in the documentary, she said, sometimes we have to stop and think, are we as strong as our ancestors? Because when we talk about what's going on and we compare and contrast to then and now, I mean, they were mobilizing. They didn't like something and they made it a priority with everything against them. And here we are. And when I say we, I am really in terms speaking to my generation, the younger people. Here we are, we don't like something and we're big. We have big masses. But that's just it. You know what I mean? And not to say that people are not doing anything, because I know so many people my age, younger, older, in the same category, who are really moving and shaking and trying. At the same time, as a whole, we cannot forget the part that we do play in it, and not holding these people accountable, and not going and actually making sure that the things that we want, that we need, that it's getting done. Because they did, with everything against them, with so many things against them.
That's a good point. Now, I want to ask you, what grade would you give the Democratic majority that we've seen these since 2021?
Well, if I were to grade the Democrats, I would have to give them a B minus. And the reason why is because if a C is a middle grade, it's above that, but it's not enough to deserve any like recognition or any awards as if they've done something we have never seen before. But the reason why I can't give them a middle passing grade, but like I have to give them something, that's why I give them a B, but a B minus, is because I do really appreciate the fact that although it's very recent, the student loan forgiveness, because that is something that I did not even comprehend actually happening. That's something that I've heard about for many, many years before I even came into college. And now I'm literally leaving college. I'm about to go into higher education, and it's actually happening. So this to me is something that I literally cannot believe. So although it's just one thing and other people may not care as much, to me, this is like the most important thing that has ever happened in politics to me personally, other than some of the more polarizing things like how Jordan was talking. I know a lot of people could probably resonate with him when he was talking about how the number one thing that comes to his mind is the black race, because we live in such a polarizing time that even race is now a political issue. With the whole Black Lives Matter movement, the riots and protests from the frustration of the lack of no movement being done for us. And then the stark contrast to when the other side reacts in the exact same manner, how they're treated very differently from what we're treated when we react in retaliation. Just speaking about like the January 6th attack, compared to the Black Lives Matter protest, the whole civil rights movement going all the way back into like the 60s, the 70s, things like this. It's a really unfair game that we're playing, where it's like the rules are warped, where it's like if you complain, you're a sore loser, while if the other side complains, it's like they need to get their needs tended to, and it's really frustrating. And that's how you have this polarizing effect, where even though people are upset and they may not be completely satisfied with the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, for the majority of Black people, is actually not an option, to be honest. And I could generally say that with the people I interact with on a daily basis, that's something that literally almost very few Black people I interact with actually even consider. And not just on a political standpoint, but just as a race that you're born into. Like, just your race has such a big factor into politics compared to us, compared to like white people. Just to be blunt with it, it just matters more to us because we have a lot more to lose compared to other races.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I don't know. When I think about politics, I think about it like twofold, right? Where like half of it is like symbolic and like what a party stands for, what they represent, how they make you feel, and then the other half is kind of like tangibles, right? Like what are they going to actually do, and like what are they going to provide? And I'm personally not really too interested in the symbolic stuff in comparison to like the tangibles because I don't really believe any of them. You know what I mean? Like I don't believe they stand for what they stand for. I don't believe they're like genuine, right? I'm a little skeptical. So in terms of like the tangibles, I feel like, you know, I say right now they get like a C plus, right? Where it's like you're not failing, but you could do better. You're not excelling, right? Like if you get a C in the class, you can move on, but it's like nobody's clapping, you're not getting a little medal or anything like that. Like you've done your job to a certain extent and enough to pass. But um, overall, I feel like between like Joey said, that student loan debt, I got a lot of it. So you put 20,000 back in my pocket, I'm not gonna be but so mad. And you know what I mean? Like you let people out of prison for marijuana when corporations are profiting off of that. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. It's gonna make me like you a little bit more. So I'm gonna give him a C plus.
I think me personally, I'm disinterested in a lot of it these days, to be honest, to be quite frank with you. I'm disinterested in a lot of it for multiple different reasons. If I were to give them a grade, I would give them I was going to say an A for effort, but effort does not obviously start with an A. But I would give them an A for trying, for the for what they're putting out there. But then when it's time to show up, I would give them an FA, which stands for failure to attend. I agree wholeheartedly. I love the idea of the decriminalization of marijuana. I love the idea of the student loan forgiveness, but I'm a 21-year-old student who's still in college. And to begin with, I didn't think that it applied to me. I was like, although I have acquired these loans every single year, I haven't started to pay back on them. So does this apply to me? And everybody was like, no, it's forever. No, he did it. He said it. He's saving the day. Then when I take the time to go and do the research, one of the stipulations is that you've had to pay, like you've had to submit like 150 payments, or like you have had to pay X amount to your loan. You have had to been out of school for X amount of time in order to qualify. So although it's great, and it's great for a lot of people, I do feel like my generation had a lot to do with it, to push for it, saying that student loans need to be canceled. Like this is something that we need. And then it's not even applying to me. At least right now it's not. And who's to say 4 years down the line, 6 years down the line, however long, that I'm going to get the opportunity to do it again when it's all said and done, when it's time for me to start paying back on these loans. You know what I mean? So that's the grade that I would give them.
So it seems like you guys have been jaded a little bit, or at least the enthusiasm that I saw in you, Mackenzie and Jordan, 2 years ago, doesn't seem to be at the same level as we're entering another election season. We're about 4 weeks away from this election, and so I want to ask, what would it do? What would it take for the Democrats to earn an A?
Mike, before we go to that question, I'm a little curious to know what you and Sam, like, what you guys' answers are gonna be. Like, you know, I know you're the host, but if I could flip the question on you and Sam, I'd be really interested to hear.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to apologize. I live in the mountains of Georgia, and so what I've gained in beauty, I've lost in technology. So my Wi-Fi signal goes in and out. So I apologize for that. But to me, looking at in context what the Democratic Party has been facing within the last year, the polarization of the two parties, going up where the Republican Party has really just almost given itself to Trump and defending Trump, you know, having the committee, the January 6th committee, fight against all these things, and then trying to still legislate, even though they know most of the Republicans will not go for what they are doing. So that's a lot that the I've never in my lifetime seen these two parties pulling apart like we have now, and then one party really trying to get things done against all odds. So even though I don't think they've done maybe enough, I am impressed with what they have been able to try and do pushing against such a massive tide. And so I actually would give them an A for what they've been able to at least accomplish, even though they've been fighting the whole way, going against the tide. So yeah, they're doing a pretty good job.
And I would add to what's been said. You know, when we look at the legislative record, we really haven't seen this many legislative wins. These are some really crucial legislative victories here. We're talking about a gun legislation. Remember, President Obama said that was the one thing that he regretted that he couldn't accomplish during his presidency after the Sandy Hook shooting that took place in December of 2012. When you're looking at what we got done with the environment, remember, it wasn't just the fact that Biden got the United States back into the Paris Climate Accord, but we have actually the first major piece of legislation that allocates federal funds to meeting our goals of reducing our carbon footprint in the world. That's the first time this has happened. And I think that there were some things that they sought out to do but didn't get accomplished. The voting rights legislation that they tried to get done in February, I think the John Lewis voting rights bill, that was something that was a failure. And another thing was, I think, the codification of Roe v. Wade. But it wasn't for lack of trying. It was just for lack of numbers in the Senate. Because the House, of course, we have a razor thin majority there. They got it done, but the Senate couldn't get it across the finish line. I think that should motivate folks rather than discourage them to say, okay, if we got this much done with this much resistance, how much more should we expect if we get more of a majority? And I think Biden's really been unique in this position. You know, he really fashioned himself as a moderate when he ran. He's someone who is a senator at heart. He's been in the Senate since 1972. He knows the process. He's a very familiar person. He didn't alienate Bernie Sanders like the Clinton folks did. Bernie Sanders is the chairman of the Budget Committee, right? So there was a place for folks on the Bernie wing of the party to make their voices known in the administration.
But Mike, this is a problem that I think I've seen within the Democratic Party messaging. You know, the Republicans do a great job of getting their message out, for everybody getting on the same page, saying the same things, you know, getting that message, whatever the message is. You know, you don't have to agree with it, but they do a great job of getting that message out, whatever it is. For Democrats, it seems like one person's saying one thing, another person's saying another, and we're not really sure, well, what is it you guys are doing? What's going on here? And it seems like that's a problem, a big problem for the Democratic Party is messaging. And I don't know how we fix that.
So I'm interested. Do you guys believe, because this, for some reason, this has been a question that even Democratic candidates like Joe Cunningham running for, I believe he's running for governor in South Carolina. You've had Tim Ryan, who's running for Senate in Ohio, mention even this past Monday night when he was debating J.D. Vance that they don't think that Biden should run for re-election. I want to ask you, do you believe Biden should run for re-election in 2024?
I think so. I think yes. And the reason why is because I believe when you start a work, you should finish it. And what I mean by that is whether he's the best person for the job or not doesn't really matter as much as he's the best person to finish the job that he started specifically. Because similar in a way, if I start a paper and I ask Jordan to finish it for me, although Jordan may be a great writer in his own right, it might be a conflict of interest for him to finish something that I started, and I may start in certain areas that he may not be particularly strength in. And you see what I'm saying? It's like the compatibility definitely will cause an issue. And I believe that if he started something, we should see it through to the end, rather than we try to swap him out for someone new, or even worse, we switch complete parties over power yet again and completely undo what was already starting to get set up. So I do believe that he should see it through to the end.
I'm gonna provide a little pushback on Joey's points. You know, I love you, Joey, but you know, a presidential term is only 4 years, so you know, like seeing it through to the end of the term is one thing, and then like running for reelection is another. When I think about like one-term presidents, you know, Jimmy Carter is like the first person that comes to mind, and I feel like he had one of the most successful presidencies, and it was only one term. And I feel like a lot of times people, or especially like politicians, they're so worried about, you know, getting reelected that they don't do all that they can do in their first term because they're so worried about the second term. And it's like, to me, it's better to go all the way and go one term and do all that you can do, you know what I mean, than to try to play the politic game and try to worry about getting reelected. Um, I don't know if Joe Biden. I feel like I don't know who would run in his place. Is kind of like my only thing. I don't know if not Joe Biden, then who. I feel like, you know, Joe Biden isn't like the most stellar person, so I don't think it's a crazy idea. But I don't know who they would put in his place and how they would connect with people.
I'll just be honest. I can't stand that question anytime it's brought up. And the reason why is we've never had this kind of debate before. We didn't have it for Obama or Clinton or even Carter. I think the last time the Democratic Party, challenged their own incumbent, they learned their lesson. That was with Ted Kennedy in 79, 80, 1980. And it really split the party in two almost and weakened them by the time Reagan, who was a formidable challenger in his own respect, came along. And you know, Reagan, of course, I mean, it was a they call it the Reagan Revolution, right? You had televangelists like Jerry Falwell, of course, doing Reagan's groundwork with evangelicals, but all of the factors that contributed to his election victory in 1980 aside, it made Carter a weaker candidate. And I think today, you know, people say, "Oh, he's too old. He's turning 80 in November," and the same criticism they have for Nancy Pelosi, they have for Jim Clyburn, they have for Steny Hoyer, and the argument is we need younger. And my pushback to them is, or my counter argument to them is, younger doesn't always mean more effective. Because the question, like you mentioned, Jordan, is okay, who can do as great of a job or better? And at this stage, when I'm looking at the potential candidates that they threw out, you know, they threw out, you know, Gavin Newsom possibly as someone, and I would vote for him personally, but I don't think, you know, you don't do that. You don't you don't challenge your own president, and you don't replace them, especially when you've got some wins under your belt. It's only beneficial to the other side, in my view. And when you looked at the 17, I believe, Democratic candidates running, who else could get this much? Who else could allow or have the discretion to let Schumer take control and get Joe Manchin over the summer to a position of a yes, right? Would it be Buttigieg, right, who was only mayor of a small town in the middle of the country? Bernie Sanders, I mean, it'll be hard because the numbers he was putting up, his version of the middle is nowhere near where Biden is in terms of the middle between Republicans and Democrats. So it's like, who at the end of the day could get these incremental progressive wins done in such a short amount of time. And because of that reason, because I can't think of anyone, I don't think it makes sense. I think it's disadvantageous to the party to even entertain the idea. And I think those who are saying he shouldn't run should ask themselves, if not him, then who? Because we're getting closer to that time. People say it's such a long way away. Campaign really begins the year before. As soon as November 9th comes, it's off to the races. Anyone else?
Well, I think that part of a bigger problem is really we look at our candidates a lot of times and we're not enthusiastic about it because we're like, is this the best that we have? It's almost like it's those who are power hungry to a certain degree are running for it, but those who may be really good and qualified, they don't want to go through the headache. There's a lot of stuff that gets thrown at people who are candidates, and it's a drag out fight, and they're making it personal, and they're attacking them and their families, and it's just a big mess. So I think we're losing out on a whole bunch of really good people on both sides because they're like, I don't want to go through that. I'm not that power hungry. And that goes to a bigger, broader picture of how do we stop attacking each other and get to the point where we are talking and dialoguing and listening and caring so that the good people, the better candidates, will actually say, you know what? Yes, I do want to go and run. We need to somehow move to that place. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's not going to be an easy journey. But that's the only way I think we can get better candidates.
And it kills me. These MAGA folks always like to talk about how Biden is so senile and he's mentally not there. And I'm like, your champion is the very one who wanted to inject bleach and light into our bodies when it came down to the COVID-19 virus. He's the one who took to the podium and said, who knew healthcare could be this complicated? Right?
But remember, Mike, Trump had 72 million people? He had the highest recorded, or he broke the record for the amount of people voting for him. And the only reason he lost was because Biden beat that record. So there's a whole lot of Americans that listen to him, know him. It wasn't the first time. This is the second time, gone through 4 years and said, yes, that's our guy.
Yeah. And the flip side of that is also the majority of the people rejected him twice. 3 million more people, over 3 million more people voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And then to your point, Mrs. Evans, like over, I believe, like close to 7 million people voted against him in the second time he ran. So it's like your solution, and I think Joey mentioned this earlier. We have all these problems. We talked about inflation. We talked about the debt. We talked about student loan debt. We talked about abortion. What is your answer to that, Republican Party? What is the alternative? If this is not what we want, if this is not enough, what is your choice? What are our other options? And Mitch McConnell says, talk to me after the election. And it's the same kind of smugness he showed in the debate against his opponent 2 years ago when he told the moderator, go to the next question because I know my seat is safe. I don't have to answer questions I don't want to answer. And these are the things we got to pay attention to, folks. I mean, yes, we need to hold those elected, hold their feet to the fire, but we also got to realize this is a, like Jim Clyburn said, compare Biden to the alternative, not the almighty, right? And I think that's important. So in conjunction,
Mike, he won those strategies. He won. So in a game where you just want to win, if he can get away with that and get voted and have that kind of power, it's going to keep happening until they lose. And that's on both sides. If you win, you're going to use that strategy, even if it's ugly.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, what's more important to you? Someone who's politically, ideologically pure, or someone who's pragmatic and get incremental things done, even if it's not 100% of what you want?
I think Jordan kind of answered that question a couple of questions back in terms of, for me personally, I don't too much care about what you guys hold true, your core values, your core beliefs. I do to a certain extent, but at the same time, I know that over time things change and people change and feelings change and legislation changes and everything changes over time, right? And so I just feel like, me personally, I want to see you do it. I want to see, and not only do I want to see you do it, I want to see you also hold me accountable. I want you to tell me what I need to do. I want you to tell me what I can do to help you do what you need to do, and not necessarily, oh, I pledge allegiance to the Democratic Party for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? Like, if you're not doing what I feel is good work, quality work, and that's not to say that neither of them are, or they're not, but at the same time, I'm more interested in practical change rather than just what we stand for, what we should stand for, what we want to give off of what we stand for.
And to that point, we've got in the Republicans a party that's proven, I think, that they don't care about ideological purity at all. There was a time when you had, folks who were sold on the Reagan ideology of government is the problem, smaller government. But now we're getting to a place where we had conservative media personality Dana Loesch saying, I don't care if Herschel Walker abort or kill baby eagles. I want control of the Senate. In other words, I don't care if he was a hypocrite in saying he doesn't want any abortion rights at all or any kind of exceptions to allow a woman to have an abortion. And then he went behind everyone's back and secretly paid off his girlfriend to go and do that. I don't care if that happened. I want control. I want political power. And that's what I think is important, the different mindsets. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about as I'm asking you that question, because there are folks who are like, listen, I'll tell you that that's what I believe. I believe it. But at the end of the day, I don't care. I just want to see a red an R in that seat. Anyone else?
And I'm sorry, just quickly, but in my head, the way that I interpret that as when I think of ideological purity, I think of the two words and I think of what they mean. And I feel like that could be different for somebody else. So just to the point that you made, I don't care what they did. As long as they're Republican, they bleed red, white, and blue. They are true to the day we die. That's what I look to them as. And when I say them, I'm meaning the Republican Party. I think that they are. I think that they will, for example, Donald Trump, somebody who the furthest person from your mind, the furthest person qualified, at least in my humble opinion, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, you ran as a Republican and you said stuff that we liked, you said some stuff that we didn't like, but you said a whole lot of stuff that we like and that we agree with and that holds true to our core values. And so we're going to vote you in, you know what I mean? And so I feel like a lot of them do run on that in a way.
So has January 6th, the January 6th committee hearings resumed today. And the focus of those hearings, what was the mental state of Donald Trump, right? This is we're coming to the end of these things now. And it comes at a unique time, 4 weeks away from an election, crucial election. Have the January 6th committee hearings, has January 6th, the event itself, had any influence, or does that have any influence in how you vote in this year's midterm elections?
For me, it's just kind of reinforced what I already knew. I mean, I can look at events and hear what a person's saying, and I can make those judgments for myself. So, if it walks like a duck and sounds like a duck, then I'm going to say you're a duck unless I see something different. And so what I heard, that's the thing with me in dealing with Trump. Trump's been consistent from the very beginning. He hasn't gone out there and hidden himself and then all of a sudden come out differently and we're all like, oh, whoa, hold on a second. That's not what I thought you were. From the very first time he came down that escalator in his very first speech, that I was like, oh my gosh, what is this guy? There's no way he's going to get elected. And he got elected. So, it's then okay, how do we view the people that are there? And if these are the type of people we want, then yeah, we'll keep electing them. But if we want something different, we have to really seek and find people who have our own way of thinking ideologically. But to me, it's like what Mackenzie was saying. Ideological can change. Ideological views can change. Let's get things done. And to get things done, the beautiful thing about action is oftentimes then we have to work together. We have to talk with each other. We have to compromise. So when we do those things, I think that's a way of moving forward that's productive.
Jordan, Joey, January 6th, does that influence how you vote?
Yeah, no, personally, I don't really have too many strong feelings about January 6th. To me, seeing those, I don't know what to call them, but seeing those people do that on January 6th, to me, I just was kind of happy because I knew that's how they acted anyways. So to see them do it in the Capitol, to me, it was a little entertaining. It was sad to a certain degree, but I just like to see the truth come out in light. But in terms of like me feeling, I don't know, like I don't get too emotionally involved with certain things. So I didn't really get like too invested in it. But I just thought it was interesting to see how the response to that, that event, and I always think about it from to a certain extent. Like if those were Black people and that was Black Lives Matter, how would that have been perceived in the media, and how would the government have handled it?
You know how.
Exactly, right? Like if those are some Black people that ran into the Capitol, it's no telling they would have put the full force of God behind that. But to see that it was Caucasians and Republicans and stuff like that, the response was very differently. So it didn't really change much to me. It really didn't have much of an effect on my personal life, but I thought it was interesting.
January 6th to me was a very symbolic event. It was not just eventful, it was very symbolic because it goes to show you how far people will go when they're not used to losing. And some people are so used to winning, and then when they don't get their way and now they have to play by the rules and they have to give up their turn, and they're so used to everything being skewed to help them win, to help them, defend themselves, an excuse, escape vehicle. And when you cut all of those off, it's like cornering a rat. What happens is you get retaliation. And then this was one of the biggest retaliations that we have on camera is people literally breaking down walls trying to get into what's supposed to be one of the most guarded and protected locations in the whole U.S. with ease. So it goes to show you, it's like, really, we have rules, but it only applies when the people in charge feel like applying them. And that was not really a big shocker to the Black community, but it was a shocker to the world because it was very embarrassing. And that really was symbolic in a way because it was like the final act. It was like the final scene in a movie. The whole thing was embarrassing. The whole 4 years was horrible. But that was probably the worst event that could have happened just to make everything look even worse. And it's embarrassing, really. Like America really, it was not a good look. And it really makes it makes us hard for other countries to take us serious when this is what our politics has devolved into. It's not politics anymore. It's like temper tantrums, and whoever screams the loudest, whoever fights the most, whoever does the most is the one that gets heard and seen. And it's embarrassing to have adults acting like this when we go to school and we don't even allow children to act like this. It's horrible.
And just to jump on what Joey was saying, I think January 6th for me was both seeing America at its worst and its best. Because when January 6th happened and they stormed the Capitol and it came very close to just total anarchy, and you got the president not saying anything and so much chaos. But then when they cleared it out, the senators came back and the institution, although it was damaged, did not break. And then it became a proud moment for me to say, wow, look at what has just happened. And yet you've got people on both sides of the aisle that were determined to say, no, we still need to see this process go through. And there are many countries whereby that would not have happened. And so that speaks well for our institutions. That speaks well about our military. There are generals who basically were asked to come in and help, and was said, no, we cannot do that. We have civilian authority over us, and we'll abide by that. So even though it's very damaged, and January 6th brought that out, I think it also brought out a lot of good. We could see the potential that our country is still strong, even though it's been battered and beaten.
And really quick on the last minute of the segment, I want to ask you, what issues do you think are not being addressed by either party in the 2022 midterm elections that you think are important? Real quick, rapid fire session. Anyone can start.
Just what Jordan said, my people, my community.
It's definitely race relations.
Yeah, just echoing that. I feel like stuff specifically to help the Black community. I feel like the government historically has done a lot to hurt the Black community and not enough to right those wrongs.
This might seem a little off topic, but it's in relation to also the disparity between the races of Black and whites in America, the civil war that we have going on. And what I'm going to bring up, which sounds kind of wild, but I'll explain why, is the drug policies in America. Because I am going to be doing neuropsychopharmacology, and that's what I do. I study the impact of drugs on society and individuals and how they think and how they react. And it's blatantly obvious the way that these laws are written. They're not written by scientists, but they're written by lawyers that don't understand how these compounds work and how they interact with societies. And it's written in a way to blatantly target and attack different groups of people, although the science says otherwise. And number one, we cannot have strict control over some things that have very little impact over other people. And then we cannot have these loose and government-funded substances which cause the most chaos, the most death, the most pain. And it's been proven. It's not opinionated. This is not an argument. This is a fact. These things are legal. These things you can go and buy, and they kill you. And this is an issue that doesn't just stop at substance abuse, but it stops at even the importance of how loud people want to cry about these things. Things like the opioid epidemic proportionally targets white people compared to Black people. And that is what is constantly being brought up and constantly reminded is a problem, while we have other issues that affect Black people and it's completely ignored. You understand what I'm saying? It's like it goes back again to the January 6th thing, where it's like when people start losing, it's like some needs matter more to others, not because of the need itself, but it's because who's complaining about it. It's also several other instances I could go on and on, but I'm just going to leave it at that, where it's not fair, really.
Well, thank you so much, Mackenzie, Joey, Mr. Sam, Jordan. I thoroughly enjoyed this segment of the program. Very insightful. Thank you for being a part of episode 78 of the Political Mic. Tune in. We're about to have another dynamic panel discussion, but thank you guys for what you brought to the table. Well, we're here, episode 78 of the Political Mic. Thank you guys for staying on. I'm going to go ahead and introduce this distinguished group. I'm very excited. Well, first of all, we've got a lot to dive into. For instance, we've got the Supreme Court saying that it's not going to accept Trump's request to intervene on its behalf. We have the Supreme Court actually staying clear of actually intervening to indicate that the specifically classified documents seized from Mar-a-Lago should be held by a third neutral person. That's one thing we're going to address. Representative Kinzinger unveils a bipartisan series of midterm endorsements Tuesday that include a handful of Democrats. seeking to become their state's top election officials. The United States tying itself closer to Kyiv as top officials see echoes of Cuba, and Democrats rage as Saudis take action to ensure that the United States now has to experience higher gas prices. So they're raging over the oil reduction, vowing to block weapons sales. So here to help me dive into these topics are, for instance, we have Professor Fred Cook, who's no guest to the political mic at all. He's been on here a number of times. I'm glad to have his views represented quite again tonight. He represents a wide range of clients in the areas of government relations, municipal law, and corporate and land use matters. His practice includes representing businesses and organizations in legislative matters before the Council of the District of Columbia. He's also an adjunct professor at Howard University School of Law. We also have Miss Irina Zuckerman, who was born in Ukraine, raised in the United States. She has an academic background in the Middle East, North Africa, and a professional expertise in transactional issues, including in particular Russian and Chinese active measures, information warfare, and the Gulf states / Iran influence campaigns. Because of her extensive professional engagement with diverse communities, her language skills, and travel experience, she is comfortable commenting on a wide range of topics, mostly foreign that focus on foreign policy and ideological extremism. Ms. Zuckerman, thanks for being back on. We also have Dr. Deborah Blaine, who has practiced medicine for over 30 years and watched the changes that have turned patients into customers, medicine into an industry whose sole objective is profit. It inspired her to write her first book, Code Blue, The Other End of the Stethoscope, because she wanted to share the challenges doctors face when trying to provide good standard of care treatment to our patients. She said that our hands are tied at so many turns by insurance companies, the pharmaceutical industry, and the massive corporations that have swallowed up medical practices. She also has another novel, Undue Influence, which she wrote in response to the wave of extremism that has fractured our communities in the United States, and in which so many have asserted their opinions simply by following their friends, their political parties, and the barrage of fake news and disinformation that abounds. Dr. Blaine, thanks for being a part of the political mic tonight. And we also have, last but certainly not least, Dr. Ernest Nasto, who writes extensively about American politics on Albanian media. He's also the author of the only book in Albanian language about the role of the religious faith in American history and politics. So I'm glad to have him here as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to go ahead and dive right in. I want to ask you, in light of the Supreme Court decision, of course, this is coming of the Trump administration requesting specifically that the Supreme Court intervene. I actually thought the Supreme Court was going to intervene, of course, because in addition to the fact that you had the question, can the United States, former United States president, assert executive privilege over documents that he retrieved after leaving the White House? I thought that was something that might be unique in terms of constitutional law, and I thought that being that he has a majority of the justices on the court, he has appointed 3 of them. It's now a 6-3 majority for conservatives. I thought for sure that this would be a Trump win again. Not so. And so what's interesting is that the initial special master order that the United States District Court Judge Eileen Cannon issued at Trump's request barred the government from using any of the seized records, including the potentially classified documents, for criminal investigation purposes until the special master process was complete. The Justice Department appealed her ruling to the Atlanta-based 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, but it sought emergency relief only to restore access to the documents. Trump's bid for Supreme Court relief did not seek to restore the ban Cannon initially opposed on the investigators accessing the documents with classified markings, and Trump's request to the Supreme Court and the Justice Department's response were technically submitted to Justice Clarence Thomas because he oversees the 11th Circuit. I thought Clarence Thomas should have been recused from all kinds from this case altogether, being that his wife was so heavily involved in the January 6th insurrection activities. I want to ask you, panelists, in your view, do you believe that the Supreme Court made the right decision in staying clear of this situation and saying that it's not going to hear Trump's appeal?
I'll be the obnoxious lawyer on this group and say, yeah, I think so. I think it's a pretty narrow appeal and a pretty narrow no. I think if you want to be a bit more cynical, there's plenty of time for the forces of darkness on the Supreme Court to do something to help Mr. Trump later on. This is really not a big loss or a big win for either side at this juncture, but there's time enough for the Supreme Court to weigh in a way that might be problematic. But this seemed like the right thing to do. I think, 8.5, 9 times out of 10, you'd get this result.
As someone who is also has a legal background, I'm also a lawyer, practicing lawyer. I not only agree but want to add a little bit to Professor Cook's response. In that, I was actually quite confident that Justice Thomas's political connections would not affect his judgment on or the outcome in this particular case. Judicial philosophy does not always translate into desirable political outcomes for any of the parties in a particular case. The other issue worth noting here is that executive privilege generally only applies to the time in office, so I'm not particularly surprised at the factual outcome here. I think from the Supreme Court's perspective, it's not really an innovative or groundbreaking topic. I think to them it's kind of the red line here is pretty clear. From the procedural perspective, I'm not particularly shocked at the outcome. What happens ultimately when the case is reviewed, when we get to the more substantive issue of classified of classification of the crimes committed and so forth, it remains to be seen. But because one of the federal court judges already opined that any criminal evidence or other evidence collected in this case could be used in support of criminal investigations, which is fairly normal. I do believe that there is going to be a great deal more of substantive discussion at later stages.
Well, I would say that not taking up this claim from former President Trump, the court showed to the American people that it can be not so politicized, as Professor Cook rightly mentioned, even with his 1/3 of appointees or 1/3 of justices being appointed by himself. It looks like in this case they are not doing his bidding, and that's what I think is the most important from a political viewpoint. I mean, they refuse to take up his claims of fraud during the elections or after the elections. They refused to block the New York prosecutors from having access to his documents related to his business dealings. And they refused also to stop the select committee from getting his documents from National Archives. So this is in the same continuation of these defeats, I would say, for former President Trump. So I see it as a very positive thing politically. That's what I wanted to say.
I think that the thing that's the most disturbing is the fact that we even ask this question in the way that we do, that we have to consider that will political leanings sway the Supreme Court and the Department of Justice. That branch of government was established to be completely separate from and completely distant from the political mire, and that's the whole purpose of it, is to have some body that is neutral. And what we've been finding is that the things that should be neutral, there's so much politicization of every issue now, where I think people in Congress are not voting on what it means, what they believe. They're voting based on their party. And that's, it didn't used to be that we would be so, Democrats and Republicans didn't used to be so far apart. Like, there were some issues that you could say, well, as the Republicans, I agree with that, and the Democrats, I agree with that. And there wasn't this big rift, where you couldn't talk to each other. And that's a really disturbing problem in our whole society, in our whole culture. And the fact that it does trickle into and has trickled into the Supreme Court and the Department of Justice is the most disconcerting, because that's where we're supposed to get justice. And so I'm very gratified that they came to the decision that they did. And the thing that disturbs me is that we had to worry about it.
But I think, Dr. Blaine, that the Supreme Court cannot escape this great politicization of our political landscape, right? That's in keeping with that. So, I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's where we are. We have been.
It is where we are,
straying apart since at least 1994 or something.
Yeah, and especially in
the center has been hollowed a lot, so
yeah,
that's where we are.
I agree.
It's unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate. I mean, there's certain things in this country that are supposed to be sacrosanct, and I don't want to use a religious term, because one of those things is separation of church and state, and that, and just. I'm very disturbed by the direction that our country has been going in, and it seems like it's continuing down a path that, if we don't stop, if we don't manage to turn it back, it's not going to be good for us in our relationships with each other, in the community, our relationship with our planet. I feel like what's going on in Congress half the time is two football teams, just trying to win the game, as opposed to serving our country, doing their job, and achieving policy making in our country that would help move us forward and give us the great freedoms that we've counted on having all this time.
Or resolving issues, as you would say, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So throughout this entire process, it seemed like the Trump legal team was just throwing up whatever sticks at the wall.
Yes.
They argued that, these documents were kept for the presidential archives, for the upcoming Trump library. And then the argument is, well, if you were going to keep these for the library, why wasn't that your initial argument? Why are we now hearing that this far along this process? I want to get your thoughts on whether the Trump legal team had a point, though, because they did argue that Raymond Gere, the senior U.S. judge appointed as special master, will be substantially impaired. In other words, his work would be slowed down if the Supreme Court did not intervene and allow these 100 documents to be outside, or of what the DOJ can touch to review. So, do you think the legal team for the Trump for former President Trump had a point there? Anyone can jump in.
No, I don't think they had a point at all. I think it was a makeshift argument, a make-weight argument, a facetious argument that they made. The issue really reduces itself to, there is no possessory interest that Donald John Trump has in those documents whatsoever. There's no argument of executive privilege. There's no argument of ownership, prior ownership, continued ownership. Those documents belong to the government of the United States, the people of the United States. He has absolutely no possessory interest. So the idea that you could steal government documents that you worked with as a part of your government job, then have the government seize them pursuant to a search warrant, that somehow you can use as your defense that these were in my possession, they are therefore mine, and I need a third party or a judge to look at the documents, classified though they may be, to determine if I have some possessory interest. He has none. Now, if he wants to raise that as a defense at a criminal trial, should there be one, he is perfectly free to do that. But at a pre-trial stage, there is absolutely no basis for him to maintain any sort of argument about a possessory interest. So this is kind of, turning the law, at least as part of the law, on its head. but it's as you said, they've used multiple excuses or multiple explanations for why he had the documents. I was a prosecutor for a while. One of the things you learn as a prosecutor is when the defendant changes his story again and again, it's probably because the defendant is not telling the truth. Okay, the truth doesn't change, lies change.
I fully agree with the substantive point here and with the larger point about the issue of classified document, but nevertheless, I will attempt to offer an explanation for the logic of this procedural step. And the logic, quite simply, lies in Donald Trump's and his legal teams as his agents' paranoia, which has been quite evident from the very beginning of this whole issue with the documents and why he removed them to begin with. The argument being made here, very simply, is that DOJ, in Donald Trump's estimation, is politically biased against him and will not fairly look at the documents. For instance, if some of the documents have been properly declassified, but for whatever reason have been marked classified, he believes that they will not fairly treat that issue and will use it against him, and hence the lawyers claim there is a need for an independent party to review those documents to make sure that the classification is in fact in line with the law. I am very hesitant to say that this is a colorable argument here, but there is some level of internal logic.
Okay, and if I'm not mistaken, that was the line of argument that the Supreme Court took, right? They said that the executive branch has a great, a big leeway on deciding those things. So,
well, yeah, the Supreme Court has said that in a number of cases over time.
Yes.
The challenge is, it seems to me, that at this stage of the proceeding, this is really the wrong place for this to happen. Because if in fact the government has exhibited bias, exhibited some sort of prejudice vis-a-vis Mr. Trump, his opportunity is at a criminal trial if in fact he's indicted and brought to trial. Every drug dealer you have ever confronted in your life will make the same argument, that the Drug Enforcement Administration, the FBI, the police are biased against me because they think I'm a drug dealer. I need to have an independent arbiter look at their evidence to see if they should be allowed to take me to trial. The system could not tolerate that. And Mr. Trump doesn't have any constitutional right that would be violated by being brought to trial, given a trial, given all of his constitutional and statutory rights. And if he wins, he wins. If he loses, he loses. But he can't stop the trial by arguing before he's even charged that there's bias that prevents the government from investigating to determine if, in fact, I should be charged.
So I do want to switch gears here a little bit because Representative Adam Kinzinger, who is one of the two Republican chairs of the January 6th committee, he has unveiled a bipartisan list of midterm endorsements, including a handful of Democrats seeking to become their state's top election officials. Representative Kinzinger endorsed 4 Democratic Secretary of State candidates, incumbent Steve Simon of Minnesota and Jocelyn Benson of Michigan, along with Arizona's Adrian Fontes and Nevada's Cisco Aguilar, both of whom are running for open seats. Kinzinger's endorsements also include Democrat Josh Shapiro's campaign for governor of Pennsylvania, where he would appoint the Secretary of State if he wins. And I think it's noteworthy to also mention that Shapiro is running against someone who was involved in the January 6th events himself. And so in an interview, Kinzinger said that he chose 2022 endorsements partly based on where they are going to be in positions that, frankly, can be bulwarks to defend against a real constitutional crisis in 2024. He said a badly placed, bad faith Secretary of State can really throw the whole country into chaos. He went ahead and endorsed Brad Raffensperger, a name that became famous in the aftermath of the last election. He successfully fended off a Trump-backed primary challenger this year after refusing to help Trump overturn the 2020 election. Kinzinger did not seek re-election this year. He is one of him and Liz Cheney have been making it a point that the democracy is in a crisis right now. And this is not the time to just align yourself with people just because they have a red behind your name. I want to get your thoughts on his endorsement list. And I want to also ask that in conjunction with the last topic we talked about, because a poll also showed that Trump's approval rating seems to, even though it remains high among the Republican Party, it has seen a decrease since the FBI's seizing of classified documents at Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. More than half of Republicans surveyed in a new morning consult a morning consult political poll revealed that 52% said they preferred Trump for president in 2024, while that number is down slightly from the 57% registered a month prior. And it signals a continued stronghold for the party. But Trump, of course, still is way ahead of his other challenger, Ron DeSantis, who's at 19%. So it does seem that it has an effect. The ongoing arguments that have been made, the back and forth between the DOJ and the Trump legal team. I want to get your thoughts on the political ramifications of the Mar-a-Lago raid by the FBI, and also Kinzinger's endorsements and his message that this is a time to really save our democracy, and that requires us to support some Democratic candidates. You had Liz Cheney in Arizona say, if I was in Arizona, I would vote for the Democratic candidates here. Anyone?
Yeah,
sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to say I have such a tremendous amount of respect for Kinzinger because, and Liz Cheney, and and all of the Republicans who have stood up to Trump, because, I think at a certain point, you want to stay and be a team player, but there's a point where you really have to go and look at yourself in the mirror and look at your conscience. And it's not just a football game. And to say, okay, we really are in danger. Our democracy, our republic, everything that stands for is really in danger, because if people continue to deny election results, then we end up with a dictatorship. There's no way around that. We know where that goes. And, so, for those people that have, and anybody who stands up against Trump gets, lambasted by Trump. And, the hold that this guy has on people, in my opinion, and I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. And I would even say that there are some things I think that Trump did that were good for this country. I'm not like against everything Trump did. I'm against the way he did everything. Just his way of being a president. There's so many things that were disastrous, but the fact that, if you disagree with him, he tries to annihilate you. And the people that even after they've been, stepped all over, and then they try to come back. And it's almost, to me, it is like a cult kind of thing. It's not rational thinking. And that's why I wrote my second book. Was my second book, Undue Influences, is a response to that. And in the book, it's this predetermined, this premeditated brainwashing of the American population and how that happens. Because when I looked around, I said, I don't understand how this could be happening. How can people not see? Why is the January 6th committee even necessary? It was broadcast on international television and everywhere else. Everybody saw what happened. How can you turn around? And even Mitch McConnell, said that this is wrong. And Lindsey Graham came out and how do you then turn around and say, oh, well, maybe it wasn't so bad? It's just like there's a thought process problem there. And, so the people, and it's become like this big wave, and Trump doesn't scare me half as much as the people that just follow him mindlessly. So the fact that there are people who stand up to him, I just respect them. Even if I don't agree with the rest of their politics, the fact that they're willing to do what their conscience tells them, I think is just, says volumes for who they are as people. And I'm very grateful that they're there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to add that I personally believe that anyone should be able to support any candidates for any reason. And that's the beauty of living in a very diverse politically country, that we have a flexible system and we can support anyone at any time. And I would add that Trump's assertions were unpresidential, but not unprecedented. What do I mean with that? Meaning obviously his behavior in terms of asserting that elections were not just rigged but should have been overturned and given to him, that was completely uh, inappropriate, destructive, and ultimately made him into a political liability for the party, which is why his support he's losing support. But where did he what fueled his rhetoric? What has allowed somebody like that to co-opt so many intelligent, thoughtful people and turn them into zombies? Unfortunately, there is a kernel of concern for them from the behavior of his opponents, who denied during his term in office that there was and there was some portion of such people that either the election itself was not legitimate and refused to acknowledge him as president and very proudly referred him as Trump is not my president, or otherwise tried to counter everything that he was trying to do with such extreme vehemence, or get him tied up in various investigations, many of which were not substantively supported, that it came to create an impression that the other party, or at least the operatives within that party, were inherently biased against Trump and Republicans, that they were not giving him a fair shake, and that future elections would be manipulated in some way. Unfortunately, that created a level of distrust that bred paranoia that lent itself to people falling for conspiracy theories, manipulation by both domestic and foreign actors, and this is where we are today. So I would ask Congressman Kissinger. I think it's fair of him to value the issue of democracy over all other issues, but I would ask him to look at the candidates he supported. Did he use the same standard for them as he used for the Republicans that he discarded? Did he evaluate whether in the past they contributed to this issue by denying Trump's own legitimacy or not? I think that's a fair question to ask.
From a political standpoint, I would say that Congressman Kinzinger did the right thing, because in such very crucial moments for the democracy as we are living right now, it's good to support even candidates from the other side which are pro-democracy, as opposed to supporting candidates from your side, but which are against democracy. So that's I think that's the most crucial point here, and it gives a very good message from a political viewpoint. And for example, this reminds me of what the Democrats did with some of those MAGA candidates. They supported some of the worst, of the most extreme MAGA candidates, in the hope that it will be easier for Democrats to win the general election in November. I think this is wrong, because you cannot support such. It's morally wrong to support such anti-democracy candidates, even if you are really exposing them for who they are. But still, you run the risk of them winning, which would be against the interests of everybody and of the Democratic Party itself. But I think that the Democrats were totally wrong, and Kinzinger is right in supporting those Democratic candidates. Now, why he backed some long shot candidates like McMullen in Utah, I don't know, but that's his judgment. But as a matter of fact, I would say that generally speaking, focusing on the pro-democracy candidates, no matter what side they are on, it's the positive thing to do. And as far as the cultish behavior that Dr. Blaine mentioned, yes, I can recognize that from my own background and upbringing under a communist regime. So I can speak to that, but that's another that's another issue, which I'm really sad to see happening here in United States. But That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of interesting. I mean, what's going on in this country now is, I think, a long time coming. I think that this undercurrent has gotten larger and larger over time. A lot of reasons for it: social media, technology, numbers of people
Yes.
have created this. But in the history of the United States, Americans, regular citizens, have always looked for the so-called great man, the so-called leader who's going to take them to some wonderful state of governance.
Promised land.
The promised land.
Yeah.
Typically, that person has not been as corrupt as Donald John Trump has turned out to be. But it is of the same cloth. It's a difference of degree, not of kind. And that's really very problematic for democracy. And we have allowed ourselves to believe that the other, whoever the opponent is, whether they're Democrats or Republicans or whoever, that they are different than us. When I used to travel in a limited sort of way outside of the United States, one of the things I used to feel good about was that in America, people disagreed, but they were really about the same thing. There were minor differences. When you went to other countries, the differences were much more stark, it seemed to me, and people felt like the other side was really evil or bad or couldn't be trusted. And we have devolved here to a state where people legitimately believe, or have been convinced to believe, that the other side is just purely evil. You cannot do business with them.
Existential peril, right?
That's right. Yeah. And that's the end of democracy, because if the notion of democracy at bottom is we can sit and talk and persuade each other to come to a place of common ground. And if you do not believe that the other side is persuadable, then there really is no premise for democracy to exist, because then they're always going to be wrong and you're always going to be right. And there's no way to get to a common ground. And democracy can't exist unless people are willing to give here and there and in some places, so that people can move, the majority of people can move along. You can do the maximum good for the maximum number kind of proposition.
Yes.
So this is a very difficult time in the history of the United States. I am a child of the 60s. I saw and lived through the so-called civil rights movement of that time, and I feared for the existence of American democracy in 67, 68, 69 in this country. But we got past it. But I'm now, as an older person, equally concerned about the longevity of this American democracy experiment, given where we are. And there is so much division, so much unwillingness to see the other guy's view. And that's why Mr. Kinzinger, who says, look, there are good people who happen to be Republicans. There are good people who happen to be Democrats. Now, maybe right now, today, there are more good people in your mind who happen to be Democrats than Republicans, but every Republican is not evil. So you need to figure out how to work with the people who have a common interest in moving democracy forward.
Can I just talk to that, Professor Cook? Is, I feel like there was a period of time up until about 10 years ago. I'm also a child of the 60s, but I was small in the 60s. But I really felt
lots of children of the 60s here.
Yeah. I felt like especially in the 80s and the 90s, I felt like we were really moving as a society. We were moving toward evolving into more enlightenment, that we were becoming more tolerant of each other. It became politically correct to be tolerant. I mean, like how, that's amazing. I mean, people just seemed, in my world, at any rate, there was much more acceptance and celebration of differences. And then all of a sudden this has happened, and I'm trying to figure out, was it always there and I didn't see it? Where was all of this sort of sub rosa, and that now all of a sudden people say, oh, it's okay for me to be intolerant, it's okay for me to hate people who aren't like me, or is it because social media has given everybody this ginormous megaphone? And
this is for a big part, Dr. Blaine. Yes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I want to believe that most people are not like that. And most people are good people, and even the people who I don't agree with, I try to see people as doing the best they can with what they have in their life, and try to understand where they're coming from. But I don't understand this. It is like to me, it's like a cult, and that's not. A democracy requires an educated population.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And
true.
I feel
That's
like
true.
we do not
But
have an educated population, because there's a whole
No.
segment of the population that refuses to acknowledge that they are lacking in knowledge. And so, and it just keeps reminding me, for those who believe, no proof is necessary, and for those who don't believe, no proof is possible. And I feel like we've kind of gotten to that point. And my question is always, were we always at that point and I just didn't know about this other level, or did we just slide back? And if aren't there enough of us who are more rational and able to look at each other and say, okay, I don't agree with you. We used to be able to say, we could have had this whole argument, disagreed about everything, and then said, okay, where do you want to go for lunch?
I firmly believe that it has been a long time in the making, Dr. Blake.
Mm-hmm.
It has been a long time in the making, at least since the 70s and 80s, with the religious right comes to mind as a factor in the 80s, and how they abandoned President Carter, which was one of their own.
Yeah.
And then the second moment, I would say it was 94 with the Republican Revolution, when politics under Newt Gingrich became a fight to the death.
I would say that I would add to that on the other side of the political divisions, there's a very common saying that politics is downstream from culture. Culturally, soft power institutions, education, the media, non-governmental institutions and organizations have been slowly eroding. They've been being polarized over time, and during the Vietnam War, a cadre of kind of radicalized academics has started playing a stronger role in the academia. So these academic theories started playing an increasing role in attracting certain types of students. So what we are seeing today, academia being basically monolithic with very limited expression for diversity of thoughts and opinions. There's a great deal of emphasis on geographic diversity, on financial diversity, on
That's true also.
and all sorts of other diversities, but not on diversity of mindsets, experiences, and genuine
Of thought, you mean?
thought,
Of thought.
thought and conscience. So unfortunately, the byproduct of that is overall low standard of education, not only from the beneficiaries of this one-sided education, but their counterparties who themselves are then driven into echo chambers and bubbles, and
Yes.
themselves, rather than engaging in thoughtful debate as once was the standard, and becoming more effective and impactful in a positive way as a result, actually become more focused on a victimhood mentality, as anyone in a bubble or echo chamber ideologically will know happens, and they become more invested in the emotional opposition rather than intellectual pursuit. And when you start bringing emotions on equal level with logic, with thought, with ideas about society and impact on society, when emotions become the primary driving factor in politics, you get what we see today.
Okay.
Yes.
My problem with Kinzinger's endorsement of Raffensperger is, if you're going to promote candidates for the sake of the democracy, then make sure that you're supporting candidates for the sake of democracy. This is the same Brad Raffensperger, although I was grateful to have him in that seat in November of 2020, when Georgia moved quickly
Yes,
to go ahead and
yes.
implement a voting law that was going to add a new ID requirement, make the runoff period shorter, reduce wait times, make it illegal to give someone a bottle of water in line. Raffensperger said that this voting law restores confidence, right? So that's my critique of his endorsement of that candidate, and you know, other Republicans who may seem like they're more mainstream Republicans but still support policies in place that have a disproportionate effect on a certain demographic, where you know it obviously has one impact on one demographic in terms of how they turn out to the polls.
True.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think you're right, but
True.
you know, you have to sort of ask yourself that in this current climate, where the Republican Party has been hijacked by Donald John Trump, why would any moral person remain a member of that party? Okay.
To fight back,
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
say, from
Right.
within.
Right. Why would you do that? Now, that's not to say you give up principles of conservatism. That's not to say you give up ideas.
No, but
that you
I
believe in.
understand institutional structures are important for effective marketing of your ideas.
Right.
And the problem with giving them over to somebody like Donald J. Trump and allowing them to be taken over without staying and fighting back is that the more power you get, the more power you get. When you get an infrastructure wholly dominated and monopolized by people like him, it can only get worse. You're not going to get a third party that's just as powerful. All you'll get is people who are marginalized and behemoth of Trumpian extremists who become even more extreme as they become more powerful, who will basically run down everyone who is independent. Or
wouldn't it be great?
Well, yes and no. I mean, in 1948, the Dixiecrats
Yes.
left the Democratic Party and were extremely racist so-called Democrats. Those people got marginalized because they could not sustain their lunacy. They could not convince a big enough majority of the population to support them. The challenge is sort of around demographics. There are roughly 250 million American adults in America, roughly 250. But if only 10% of them are crazy, that's 25 million people. That's a lot of crazy people running around doing stuff. And so the question gets to be, how does the 90% that's not crazy, how does it mobilize itself? How does it manage itself to neutralize the effect of a very large minority? I mean, numerically, a number of people, 25 million people is a lot of people. Now, it's only 10%, but even if you're working at 10 or 20% on the margins, crazy on the left and crazy on the right, you still got 50 million crazy people that you've got to deal with. And how do you manage that without making concessions to them to continue to do stuff that is harmful to the institution called democracy?
But here, Professor Cook, I think there is an issue with the system itself, the electoral, the American electoral system, because you need only a very small number of voters in each state to move that state one way or the other, right?
Sure.
That's why you see all efforts focused on those so-called toss-up states.
Yeah, swing state.
In between states, Wisconsin,
right.
I would say that it's
Florida, etc. There is just a small percentage which needs to be changed their minds to move the whole state and the whole country.
I think the answer lies in the primaries or the caucuses or whatever you want to call those processes, where the most right now the incentive system in those party gatherings to decide on who to nominate is that usually the most active candidates with the most active constituencies, they tend to win. Of course, there's party corruption in both parties with finances lining up between here and there, but it's not impossible to overcome that. And we've seen in the Republican Party, the Tea Party movement, the Bernie Sanders people on the Democratic side. We've seen populist and kind of popular uprisings against party apparatus dominance. But essentially, the idea is to get the best possible people, most support in the primaries. Unfortunately, we have seen exactly the opposite. as we've pointed out earlier today, with the most radicalized people being financed for completely cynical political reasons.
Because the most determined are those who vote in the primaries, right?
Exactly. Right. So
Yes.
basically, getting the right people up there will turn the trend. Some of them are strong enough to resist these radical moves, and in general, any form of extremism is ultimately not good for anybody. And I think rational, long-term people, not self-interested political frauds, understand that and try to maintain some level of balance. Sometimes they have to give more, some depending on where the party is at. But you will see a lot of people distancing themselves when it becomes clear that this is taking them over the edge. I think the system can ultimately balance this out. Now, whether it cannot balance itself out through the political processes alone. Just voting people in and out of the office, I don't think is the matter. The culture has to change. The political culture has to change. The institutions have to change. Who is going to be doing that? That's an open question, but it cannot. It's not sustainable.
This is a very long term issue. I mean,
yeah, it is. But as Dr. Blaine said a while ago, I mean, one of the premises of American democracy, as founded by these crazy people back in the 1770s, was that democracy depends on an educated electorate, and educated in the broad and narrow sense, educated in terms of books, but educated in terms of being informed about the issues.
And also moral.
Right. And too many of our fellow citizens are unwilling to be educated. They are turned off by it. They walk away from it. They don't want to know. And so elections too often are turned into high school class president elections where you vote for the pretty one, you know, where whoever he or she is. And it doesn't make any difference what they're saying substantively. I like him or I like her, I'll vote for her. And the policies and the skill set is extremely secondary to the electoral process, and that just produces a bad result over time. You can't survive that very long.
And they wear that unwillingness to educate themselves as a badge of honor, right?
Oh yeah. Very much. Yeah, I want to elect somebody that I can sit and have a beer with. Well, no, you don't. I want somebody who understands nuclear physics. I don't want somebody who has good taste in beer. I want somebody who actually understands monetary policy. No, I don't want to do that.
But I think now we are going deep into the causes of polarization. We are veering off from our subject.
As we're getting closer,
right? Mike Taylor's lost control.
as we're getting closer to the end, I do want to switch gears a little bit. A top Democratic senator, Senator Bob Menendez, who is the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, is vowing to block all future weapon sales in Saudi Arabia, and urging the Biden administration to immediately freeze all aspects of U.S. cooperation with the Saudi kingdom in response to its decision to cut oil production amid a global energy crisis that was set up by Russia's war in Ukraine. The message from Senator Menendez, who has veto power over the foreign arms sales, comes when the West's outrage of OPEC's the United States is upset with OPEC for slashing its oil output, a move that was seen as a gift to Russia, to Putin. In your view, panelists, do you believe that the United States should cease all or immediately freeze all aspects of U.S. cooperation with the Saudi in response to the decision to cut oil production amid a global energy crisis? Go ahead.
I'm going to jump on this. First of all, the outrage has been largely among Democrats and largely, I would say, somewhat manufactured. Why is it manufactured? Because it's a good way to generate attention and a good way to explain the very likely negative outcome for the Democrats in the midterm elections. It's very likely that the House will go red. The Senate may or may not turn red. It's too early to say, but all of this seems to be driven largely by economic factors. There's been a great deal of criticism of Biden's policy that has contributed to all of this from the energy policy domestically to his management of foreign relations overall. What I would like to add is that it's very unlikely that OPEC cut was there to benefit Russia or to harm the United States for a couple of reasons that are entirely self-serving on OPEC's part. Saudi Arabia is heavily dependent on US defense. It's not in their interest to undermine US economically. On the contrary, it's in their interest to win back US support even in the short-term future. If you read carefully the comments by the Saudi energy minister, he explained that the factor was that contributed to OPEC's decision was uncertainty. What did he mean about that specifically? Unfortunately, the media largely bypassed this comment, which I think is worth delving into to understand what really happened. It was not to help Russia because Russia does not have what Saudi Arabia needs. It doesn't have the caliber of weapons. It doesn't have the market size, and it doesn't have the GDP that a quickly growing economy, and Saudi Arabia is undergoing significant economic reforms and looking at privatizing a lot of industries. It just cannot deliver. So it doesn't make sense for them to shatter their relations with Saudi Arabia just to please Russia. So what's their self-interest then? The self-interest has to do with the regional developments, not with Russia or Ukraine, but rather with the situation involving Iran and Houthis. Houthis' truce with the Yemen government did not hold, and they're very likely to start attacking Aramco, which is Aramco sites, the oil and gas sites, mostly oil. Saudi Arabia has not been exporting much gas yet, but they're shifting to that. They're endangering the supply. We have seen that in the past, including under the Trump administration. The US has recently not been helpful in countering those attacks. Under Trump, in fact, the Aramco sites were even stopped for a few days due to the attack, and that endangers the level of supply. And Saudi Arabia is a source of oil and gas for many countries around the world, not just US and Russia. And when all the indicators show that the United States continues pursuing the nuclear deal with Iran, despite recent terrorist activity in the region, that the Houthis are back at it and are very likely to attack. That's the uncertainty the Saudi energy minister had in mind. So yes, it is direct related to US foreign policy, but not in the way that people think. What could US do at this juncture? What has the Biden administration tried to do? They misinterpreted this reasoning on OPEC side, and they tried to connect it to financial boons. They thought that by offering more money in exchange for a high set price in exchange for these supplies, they could mitigate the concern about the financial concern and serve the purpose of not having gas supplies before the elections. But first of all, from the Saudi perspective, it looked like a quid pro quo. Whether it was meant that way or not, that's how they interpreted. Second, it doesn't really help them, because even if the US pays some extra money, the risk the business risk and the political risk from resumed attacks on these facilities is far greater than what the Biden administration was offering financially. So what should US be doing instead of threatening sanctions that are completely unrelated to the reasoning here? They should be addressing the security issues.
I think that any options that the US has to influence the prices at this point are limited, because they would affect our lives one way or the other. We cannot use those. For example, we cannot release strategic reserves without limit, right? Because we will run up to limits set by international agreements.
Mm-hmm.
Or we cannot go for limiting American exports of oil, because it will affect our allies in Europe, which would need more oil. Correct?
Right.
So somebody has to come up with a shortfall if we limit or ban American exports. Or so that's why I say it's everything that we can do at this point is limited, because it will have effect on our lives, and also it will come up against our the set targets for climate change that the administration itself has set upon itself. So I think the options are limited, and they are mainly options of manipulating prices, not winning not lowering the global oil demand, which would be the best way to go, and it would be a long term also.
It's a very long-term project.
Yes.
And US, if it wanted to, US is one of the third largest producers of oil and gas.
Oil,
in the
yes.
world. Yeah, it could have, the Biden administration could have moderated its own policies given the energy crisis in Europe and given OPEC's independence, their own interests. If it does not wish to negotiate with OPEC, if it does not wish to give in to Saudi Arabia on any security front, then it should have then moderated its own policies, at least temporarily, which, by the way, would also at this point take time. Even if tomorrow Biden were to say we are restarting the pipelines and whatever, that's still not going to happen
It will
overnight.
take time. Yes, absolutely.
Take time, yeah.
But that's what should have been done if we do not wish to be dependent on foreign powers. It's cornering itself in a no-win situation by refusing to compromise on any front. It's not going to be a helpful strategy. If you prioritize domestic climate initiatives, then you should be working with the allies and working with them to address these issues. If you prioritize the Iran deal, then you should be willing to do what's needed on the energy front to not become dependent on failing foreign options. But you cannot close yourself off on every front and ignore reality. It's just not going to work.
No, I agree. I think the problem is the solution is not a political solution. The solution is a policy solution, and there has to be a cohesive policy developed and followed, and not have knee-jerk political reactions, because I think Senator Menendez and others are reacting in a knee-jerk kind of way. Well, you can't do this to us, with the United States kind of proposition, without looking at the larger picture of why the United States is in the position it is in. And there's the balance with the whole environmental thing. Well, we got to produce more oil in the United States. How do we do that within the context of the parameters we've established for environmental concerns? How do we do that in concert with our allies in Europe and other parts of the world and their oil needs? And nobody, well, we don't here in the United States, we don't tend to think of it that way. It's all a bunch of individuals jumping up and saying, I'm important, listen to me, I want you to stop doing this, I'm going to make those people behave. And it's just not helpful. It's just not helpful.
I think some of it is also, fed by the fact that people worry about what it's going to look like politically in this country if the Democratic president can't fix this and the price of gas goes up. And I think as Dr. Professor Ms. Zuckerman, I'm not sure if what you're saying, which makes a whole lot of sense, that Saudi Arabia is doing this because of concerns that Saudi Arabia has. It's like, they have they're their own person, they're their own nation, and they have their own, issues that they have to deal with. And right away, we're assuming that it's got to do with us or it's got to do with Russia without, I think it's kind of like the way we tend to treat some of our own people. We don't look at it we don't look at an issue and say, well, why is this person doing this? And maybe it doesn't have anything to do with me. And maybe I shouldn't be offended by it. But what's happened is immediately, the Democrats who are in power right now are worried, the oil prices are going to go up and the Republicans are going to win. And without taking the opportunity to step back and think about, okay, why is this happening? What can we really do about it? Maybe we can help the Middle East countries in some way, or we should be establishing much, it would be nice if we were making greater headway into, other forms of energy, but, it's not always about us, and it's not always about our enemy, but we tend to when we jump to that, then we start worrying about blame. They're going to blame us. And so we got to do something. We got to fix it. And life is not that simple. There's nuances. There's, there's shades of gray. There's color. It's not black or white. It's
not necessarily black and white. Yes, absolutely. I
Yeah,
totally
I
agree.
mean-
I totally agree with that. Yes.
Well, thank you each for what you brought to the program. Of course, all of this comes at a time when the United States is wading deeper into Russia's war in Ukraine on multiple fronts, even as the president and the Senate Armed Services Committee chair liken the conflicts of the Cold War. I think Professor Cook, you mentioned the 1960s, late 60s. Well, many people are reminiscent of the early 1960s, specifically October of 62,
Yes.
exactly
62, yes.
years ago, when there was a lot of tension over nuclear warfare between Nikita Khrushchev and Kennedy. But I want to thank you, Dr. Ernest Nasto, Ms. Irina Zuckerman, Professor Cook, and Dr. Deborah Blaine. Thank you for what you brought to the platform. I'm forever grateful. I hope for those of you that is your first time, I hope that you can come again. Thank you so much for making this such a dynamic and insightful and very thoughtful discussion. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude episode 78 of the Political Mike podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.